United States Census. Does anyone know how often those take place? Very good. Okay. And that's according to the Constitution, by the way. That's Section 1, Article 2, every 10 years. The first one was in 1790, and to date, we haven't missed one, is my understanding. 24 is how many of those that we've had. So it happens every 10 years. It's not really that big of a deal to us. Whenever a census happens, you get your deal in the mail, and you're supposed to fill it out and send it back in. It's not normally a big deal when a census happens in the Bible either. But we have an Israelite census that's going to occur tonight, and this one is a big deal. Does anyone know? We're going to turn back and refresh ourselves on these that have already taken place roughly 400 years prior to where we stand in 2 Samuel 24, which is kind of exciting. We're actually finishing up the book of 2 Samuel tonight. So 2 Samuel 24, but can anyone tell us about 400 years ago how many would it be censuses? I don't know. Censuses doesn't sound right. So oh, it's rough. I always wonder about brown recluse. The plural, is it brown recluses? I don't know. So, but anyway, the plural of census. Does anybody know how many of those there have been, looking back on our history of Israel, about 400 years? Moses did it. Good. We're going to read about that to refresh ourselves. Moses did it. Moses did it again. So there are two of those that go back, and one is more toward the beginning of the wilderness wandering period, and the second one's at the end, which makes a lot of sense when you have the generation that dies off. You need to know where the numbers stand at that point. So we're in 2 Samuel 24, and we're going to be dealing with the census that the man of God, the king, the man of the hour, David took. So we're in verse 1 of 2 Samuel 24. Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. We don't really have a ton of detail on that here, but we do know from everything we've studied up to this point, a huge swath of Israelite history. Why does God get mad with his people? Okay, they're not listening to him. It's always the same thing, isn't it? So implied here, in the very least, would be there's some matter of impropriety that's going on, some type of sin in which the people are involved, maybe a complacency. Okay, but the point is that something's off spiritually, and that's why God's going to be upset. And we're told he moved David. He uses David as, I hate to use this term, it's probably not the best one, but as a pawn in the game of life, okay? So he advances him 2 steps forward. And he's going to serve kind of as an attacker of the people, against the people of whom the Lord is so angry, Israel. So he moves David on the board against them, against his people Israel, to say, go number Israel and Judah. So we're going to find out here in just a little bit that God's not very happy with this decision. But what sense does it make that God uses the man after his own heart to do something that makes him angry against his own people? In other words, we're going to find out from David's own mouth, and you know this already if you've done the memory work, it's a matter of right and wrong. This is a sin that David commits. And in fact, in his mind, it's a very bad one, and I would agree with him in that. So God's just like moving Christians around maybe today. Back then he's moving Jews around to sin against him. That's what he wants. It takes a little bit of work here in understanding this, but I want to remind of an important fact. Turn to 2 Thessalonians 2. Keep your spot in our text. 2 Thessalonians 2. And I use this every now and then because this is the best example that I know to bring this across. So 2 Thessalonians 2, we studied this back in our Jesus is Coming series. The 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 9 through 12, speaking of comings, the coming of the lawless one, definitely not Jesus, but he likes to act like him, is by the activity of Satan with all power and false signs and wonders and with all wicked deception for those who are perishing, because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. Therefore, as a consequence, God sends them a strong delusion that they may believe what is false, in order that all may be condemned who did not believe the truth but had pleasure in unrighteousness. So these people don't practice what God has told them to do. Kind of sounds familiar back in our text. And so the Lord is angry with them. And as a consequence, we're told that God sends them strong delusion or false teaching. He sends false teachers their way so that they can hear what they really want to hear. Now, do you think God, in a hands-on way, is actually sending false teachers out all around the world so people will be deceived? Does that sound like the God you know? But that's kind of the way the text reads. Okay, so this is the same writer. Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4, and then we'll go back to our passage. 2 Timothy chapter 4, notice in verses 3 and 4. Starting in verse 3, 2 Timothy 4. Same writer, by inspiration, Paul says, "For the time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine." They're not going to listen to truth any longer. "But according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers, and they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables." Same writer talking about the same subject. People don't want to listen to the truth anymore, so they will seek out false teachers who will tell them what they want to hear that makes them feel good about themselves. Okay, so 2 Timothy 4, who's responsible for getting the false teachers? Okay, the people get them for themselves. Okay, because of free will. 2 Thessalonians 2, who gets or who sends the false teachers? God. Those are two different ideas. One is speaking of directly, and one is speaking of indirectly. Well, we can show other examples to save the time that we won't. Same thing's true of Pharaoh, the hardening of his heart. Pharaoh hardens his own heart. God hardens Pharaoh's heart. Can't be true in the same sense. It'd be contradictory. One is direct, and one is indirect. There are a number of times in the Bible when God is stated to do something that's not a good thing, that we know is not in his character to directly do, but he is in charge over all. And he allows, because of free will, a number of things to happen with which he does not personally agree. And in, no, you're okay. And in that, we're really having a night of it, aren't we, Andrea? So, yeah, no. And in that sense, because he's in control over all, he does something, not because he actually hands-on does it, but because he allows something to take place. So go ahead. Sorry.
He can look at any point in time, back, middle, or ahead.
Yeah, from our perspective, at any time, which is just mind-boggling.
Right.
Definitely so. But yeah, you're right. It's not based on a coercion. It's not based on what he forces, but it's based on his foreknowledge, or what he understands is going to happen from our perspective before said things occur. Yeah, very good, Rick. Thank you, too, Andrea. There you go. Yeah, makes sense. It all ties together, doesn't it? Yeah, thank you for that, Roy. Okay, so we are going to get back to our text. I promise you that. I would like to point out to you our parallel text of this, which is 1 Chronicles 21. If you want to make a note of that or put a ribbon there, we'll appeal to it just a couple of times as we go through the remainder. You might recall this isn't what we've been going through so much. Hey, 1 Samuel, and then we're going to study 2 Samuel as books. We're doing our best to do a harmony of these in the United Kingdom. So every now and then we'll get some of the supplemental information that's found over in the Chronicles. 1 Chronicles chapter 21. Notice how it starts out in verse 1. Then Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number Israel. Satan is the one who gets to David's heart. You go back to our main text for the evening in 2 Samuel 24, and we'll stay here for a little while now. Again, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. He moved David against them to say, go and number Israel and Judah. It's two totally different statements that are being made. It's God who does it in 2 Samuel 24. It's Satan who does it in 1 Chronicles 21. Can't be the same way, or it's a contradiction of terms. As Roy pointed out so well, God's not the author of confusion, and we know he's not contradicting himself in his speech, the one who created speech. He knows how to talk. There's no doubt about it. But what he's telling us is one's direct and one is indirect. So, indirectly, 2 Samuel 24, God is doing this in that he's allowing the freedom of choice, both on the part of his people to do dumb things and to make him angry, for his own king, who most of the time is chasing after God's own heart, but isn't right here to do something dumb himself. But as far as the one who's directly tempting David, we find that in 1 Chronicles 21. That's the devil. He's the one who invites to do wrong. So I want to point that out in part in case you're bouncing back and forth between these, because there are going to be some other slight differences, and I'll try to point those out as we go along, and we'll give some explanation behind those. So, God is angry with Israel, and David is moved indirectly by God, directly by Satan, to number Israel and Judah. Verse 2 of our text, 2 Samuel 24. Verse 2, so the king said to Joab, the commander of the army who was with him, now go throughout all the tribes of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba. And you probably recall, I'm going to put up a couple of maps. Beersheba, you see here Shiva. Sometimes the V's and the B's get interchanged from Hebrew transliteration, if you're ever wondering about that. But Beersheba is the southernmost-ish city, or at least main city in Judah. And then you go up to Dan, all the way up in the north, and just south of my point right there, just a little bit southwest from down from Mount Hermon, also known as Laish. Dan to Beersheba, all the way from north to south. He wants a census taken throughout all his land. Count the people, that I may know the number of the people. Okay, so once again, keep your spot in our text, and turn back to the book of Numbers. And I want us to read and see if we can pick out any differences in the original two numberings of God's people, and then this third one that we find by the hand of David. Numbers, first chapter. In case you've ever wondered, why is that book named that way? Keep that in mind. Verse 1, chapter 1. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month, in the second year. Okay, this is very early after coming out of Egypt. After they'd come out of that land, he said, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel. Do this by clans, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male, head by head. From 20 years old and upward, all in Israel who are able to go to war, you and Aaron shall list them company by company. Down in verses 45 and 46. So all those listed of the people of Israel by their fathers' houses, from 20 years old and upward, every man able to go to war in Israel, all those listed were 603,550. But who's counting? Okay, so we have 600 roughly and 4,000. Let's store that number away, 600, 4,000. Also in chapter 1, I want to go down and read one more verse, number 54. Thus did the people of Israel. They did according to all that the Lord commanded Moses. Okay, the second occurrence of this is in chapter 26 of Numbers. And I advertised to you that this seems to be at the end of the wilderness wandering period, so we're roughly fast forwarding 4 decades. Chapter 26 of Numbers, first 2 verses. After the plague, and this is involving Balaam of Beor and the Midianites and the Moabites and getting the Israelites to transgress the Lord's will, there's a plague sent among God's people. It's after that plague. The Lord said to Moses and to Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel from 20 years old and upward by their fathers' houses, all in Israel who are able to go to war. So a carbon copy of what happens in chapter 1. Verses 52 through 56 of this same chapter. 52 through 56. Actually, to go back to 51. This was the list of the people of Israel, 601,730. How does that compare to the first numbering roughly 4 decades prior? How does that compare, that number? Very close, but slightly less, right? Why do you think the number of people has slightly gone down in 4 decades? Normally, numbers of people increase. It's been a hard 40 years. When you say it all the time that it's been spent in the middle of a wilderness is one thing, but so much of that has to do with disobedience. Remember, there's a plague and many thousands of people are wiped out because of, there's been a lot of disobedience that's been punished through these years by God. Okay, so what's the purpose of all this? Verse 52 of this same place. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, among these the land shall be divided for inheritance according to the number of names. To a large tribe you shall give a large inheritance, and to a small tribe you shall give a small inheritance. Every tribe shall be given its inheritance in proportion to its list, but the land shall be divided by lot, According to the names of the tribes of their fathers, they shall inherit. Their inheritance shall be divided according to lot among the larger and also among the smaller. And then down in verse 63, these were those listed by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who listed the people of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. See, they're getting close to crossing over the Jordan River here. But among these, there was not one of those listed by Moses and Aaron the priest who had listed the people of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said of them, they shall die in the wilderness, not one of them was left except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun. All right, so I know that's a little bit of a background reading, but I think it's very important to do this for what we're discussing tonight. These census, whatever, they were obviously just fine by God. How do we know that each one of these censuses, I think it is, it has to be, all right, I agree. So why is it that these had to be all right and don't seem to be an issue to the Lord? I see a couple of things that stand out. First of all, numbers. Whose idea each time? The Lord said to Moses, take a census among the people. And we find in the second one that what God has in mind is you need to know the numbers of the people. Why? What is still left to happen in Canaan? The dividing of the land. And we didn't know the land allotment's going to be based on the number of people. I mean, that's common sense, right? Okay, so we go back to our text, and again, I'll say we'll be here now for a little while. So back in our text of 2 Samuel 24, verse 2, whose idea is it to number the people? Third time in Israel's history. The king, or verse 2 at the start, the king said to Joab, okay? Yeah, now, we do have that indirect statement in verse 1, right? But as far as who gives the order for it to be done, that's David. It's David's order, not the Lord's order. Okay? Now, in the previous accounts in Numbers, we're needing to know for land allotment. So how much of Canaan are we looking to divvy up during the reign of David the king? I'll give you a hint. That's a trick question. We're not doing that anymore. We've already done that. That's finished. So we don't need to know that any longer. Any suspicions as to why David wants to know the number of his men of war? I think it could be ego, and it could be, hey, if we get into a major skirmish with another nation and they have 500,000 troops, well, if we have the number we're going to find here in a little bit, we're good. We can outlast them. Where's David starting to put his confidence as king? In himself and in his men. And I believe that's where the real issue here lies. This is not the Lord's idea, number one. And number two, there is no further land allotment that's taking place, which was the original reason for the census. But now he wants to know for the sake of the might of his military as he sees it. So verse 3, Joab said to the king, now may the Lord your God add to the people 100 times more than there are, and may the eyes of my Lord the king see it. In other words, I hope our military grows so big it's the largest that the world has ever seen. Nevertheless, why does my Lord the king desire to do this thing? Now, we know Joab well enough at this point. I don't know that he's so concerned on moral grounds. Joab is not a moral man in any sense of the word. But it does seem like maybe he foresees some trouble on the horizon and understands, I don't know if this is a real great idea for us to be involved in this activity. Verse 4, the humble king, not so much here. Nevertheless, the king's word prevailed against Joab and against the captains of the army. A ruler of a land needs advisors for a reason. There isn't any one person on the planet that has all of the answers to life's troublesome questions, him or herself. And you have these advisors to help you. This is the commander of the armed forces. This is all the captains of the military. And they're all in consensus saying, King, you'd better not do this. Bad idea. And he says, what have we been seeing recently in David's history? When David wants to do something, David's going to do it. When David thinks he knows, he becomes a little full of David. And that's the case right here. So, middle of verse 4, Joab and the captains of the army went out from the presence of the king to count the people of Israel. Not their idea, not what they want to do, but it's what the king wants done, not God's idea either. Verse 5, and they crossed over the Jordan. They crossed over the Jordan, and they camped in Aroer on the right side of the town, which is in the midst of the ravine of Gad, and toward Jazer. I'm going to point out on the map, it would seem where they would cross, understand, of course, the king's reigning in Jerusalem, so to the north of my pointer, and then they're going to cross probably in that area. Aroer seems to be down here, but to the west a little bit. So around in here and to the west. So in that general area, they probably head down south, it sounds, a little bit to the southeast. Then they came to Gilead. Gilead is the greater land over here on the east side of the Jordan River, so just to the west of where I am, east side of the Jordan. They start way down southeast, and they start heading pretty much due north. From there, we're told that they go to the land of Tatim Hadshi. Not sure where that is. This one, a little more familiar with it, though. They came to Dan Ja'an, or perhaps better, Ya'an. And that's going to be in the area up here I pointed out, probably the Laish Dan, or at least in that general area. So they started way down here to the southeast, they go due north, and they pretty much, what's being said, covered all the land in the east. And from there, they go around to Sidon. Now that town, like many of these others, they're not on this map. I like to show it for the land allotment purposes, and it's so hard for whatever reason to find just a good land allotment, one of the 12 tribes that's sizable enough and pretty legible. But does anyone know exactly where Sidon would be found? Or just what general area? It's not on the map as a city. But that's up in Phoenicia to the northwest, over here in the Mediterranean seaboard. They go around to Sidon, and they came to the stronghold of Tyre. That's also in Phoenicia. And you hear about in the New Testament, Tyre and Sidon, those are often mentioned together in the Bible. So those are in the area of Phoenicia, just outside of the range of God's people. But later on, this is expanded under David's reign, and they've taken this area over. And to all the cities of the Hivites and the Canaanites, and that's moving up here on the west side of the Jordan River Valley and heading down into all of this territory just to the east of where I'm showing, but on the west side of the Jordan River. Then they went out to South Judah, and so they go down from there down to the south as far as Beersheba, which is the southernmost significant point of cities in the Israelite territory. So basically what's being said is this. They go from the capital city of Jerusalem, they cross over, they go down to the south, cover all this land all the way north, head west from there to the northwesternmost point, and head everywhere down south and cover all the western territory. Well, they're taking a census. Of course, you're going to cover all of the land. And it makes sense to go down and start up and then just work your way around back home so they can go back to Jerusalem. That's exactly what they do. Verse 8, so when they had gone through all the land, they came to Jerusalem at the end of 9 months and 20 days. Do you blame Joab for not wanting to go out on this adventure? I mean, this isn't something, hey, next couple of weeks, I guess no, it's like a year of your life is gone. It's shot. And for something that's just going to make God mad. This is a terrible idea. And poor Joab and his men, you know, it wouldn't be a lot of fun. So they come back home at the end of 9 months and 20 days. Verse 9. Then Joab gave the sum of the number of the people to the king, and there were in Israel 800,000 valiant men who drew the sword. We don't want to stop right there. There's not a period. There's a comma for a reason. And the men of Judah were 500,000 men. Remember, there are these geographical divides, just like there were, and really to some degree still exist in America today. You still hear some about the North and the South and very different ideas about things, but certainly for the country's first 100 years of existence, completely different ideas in the North and the South. Well, it's been the same thing for many years by this point in Israel, and you've had these geographical divides of Israel and Judah to the south, and even some civil conflict along the way. So, according to 2 Samuel 24, how many total men of war are there? Okay, 1.3 million. So the 800,000 plus the 500,000. Okay, here's a spot that I want you to turn back to. I hope it may be ribboned. If so, that makes it a little easier. 1 Chronicles 21, the parallel passage. I told you in the outset we're going to see some slightly different ideas and figures about things. This is one of those. So 1 Chronicles 21, verses 5 and 6. And Joab gave the sum of the numbering of the people to David. In all Israel there were 1.1 million men who drew the sword, and in Judah 470,000 who drew the sword. But that didn't even include Levi and Benjamin in the numbering, for the king's command was abhorrent to Joab. Remember, he doesn't always do what the king tells him to do, at least not fully, and that's the case here. I don't know if he ever mentions that to the king or not. Hey, we left out 2 tribes, and that's considerable. But the information we're given here, and let's just round things off, 1 point how many million? Combined. I think I heard 6, yeah. 1.6 million. 2 Samuel 24, there are only 1.3 million. That's a big difference. So here we go, another Bible contradiction, right? I don't know if you noticed a key detail back in, okay, I'm going to read this one again. In all Israel there were, this is 1 Chronicles 21, 1.1 million men. No describer, just men. Judah, 470,000 who drew the sword. Not really any, describer, just implied men also, just army men. Okay, back in our text of 2 Samuel 24, verse 9, there were in Israel 800,000, what kind of men? Valiant men who drew the sword. And the men of Judah were, and implied probably here also, 500,000 men. And so I think that could be, and I looked up in the original text just to make sure, and sure enough, in 2 Samuel 24, there is an adjective that modifies that noun that is not found in the original text of 1 Chronicles 21. And so I think what it is 1 Chronicles 21 is, hey, here's all the guys we could use, and 2 Samuel 24, here's all the guys we'd really like to use if we could just stick with these. I think they're probably more accomplished than what the other, maybe better trained than what the other ones are. Well, that's true too. Good point. Yeah. Yeah, could be. Mm-hmm. Okay, and maybe more like active duty as opposed to like reserves. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Yeah, could be. So anyway, so that's what I found in digging into it. The wording's not exactly the same between the two, and I think that's what it is. The others are the ones you really want to use, the lesser. The greater, if you really got into a pinch, probably, that you could toss all these into the mix. All right, so down in verse 10, it's a fairly lengthy one. Would anyone like to say our memory verse? I know, I need her. I don't want to do this one. Who else is going to save me? 2 Samuel 24, verse 10. Okay, I'll do this one. Nope, you? No, okay, I thought you were ready. Okay, so 2 Samuel 24:10. And David's heart condemned him after he had numbered the people. So David said to the Lord, I have sinned greatly in what I have done. But now I pray, O Lord, take away the iniquity of your servant, for I have done very foolishly. And I'd like to emphasize, this is what makes David such a great servant of God. It's not that he sins so much less than everyone else on the planet, although that may be true, to be quite frank. It certainly isn't that whenever he does sin, they're these little tiny sins, and everyone else's sins are these great big, oh, no. I think you make the case that no one has bigger, more far-reaching sins and consequence maybe who's ever lived than what David did. Well, Judas, that might be a good conversation there. But I think you could argue that about David. What makes him such a man of God is that when he does wrong, he's willing to admit it. And even though he's the head honcho, he brings himself down to a servant's type of level whenever he speaks to the Lord. I think that's what God loves about him so much. And I know we know this, but it probably is a good spot to plug this in. We have it in our sermon on Sunday. 1 John 1:9. What makes a tremendous servant of God, man, woman, adult, child, today? It's not that, man, you just do everything right all the time. No, if we say we have no sin, who are we kidding? Come on. That's a seasoned veteran, by the way, as a Christian, of many decades right now. Well, he's implying, I do the same thing even still. I fall short also. But it's as simple as this, verse 9. If we confess, just admit what it is. That's what impresses God so much, not how great you've been, but how much you're willing to admit your failures. And that's David's. Yes. I shouldn't be getting into it. I have that in my sermon on Sunday too, but this matches. Yeah, thanks, Roy. That's excellent. So true and so powerful, isn't it? In Luke 18. Oh, man, I can't wait to get to that. Appreciate you mentioning that. And notice, it's from the inside out. David is who he is. Not this facade. It's not, hey, I got to clean up some actions in my life. It's something's off in my heart. My motivation was wrong for what I did. Verse 11. Now when David arose in the morning, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Gad, David's seer, saying, Go and tell David, thus says the Lord, I offer you 3 things. Choose one of them for yourself, that I may do it to you. So Gad came to David and told him, and he said, Shall 7 years of famine come to you in your land? I'm curious, in your Bible translation, do you have an alternate reading from 7 years? No? Okay, there are some that say 3. It's because of a variation that exists. If you'll look back at what am I trying to say? The cross-reference to this, the parallel passage, you'll see in 1 Chronicles 21 that it's 3 years that are mentioned there. The Septuagint, which predates Jesus' life on the earth, that's the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament. It reads 3 also. And I looked them up, and there is somewhat of a similarity between the Hebrew words 3 and 7. So there is a little bit of a variation there in text and in reading, which one should it read. I'll give you my personal insight into it. I'm going to guess that it's probably 3. And here's the reason for that. The Lord says, I offer you how many things? 3 things. If it's 3, shall 3 years of famine come to you in your land? Or shall you flee 3 months before your enemies while they pursue you? Or shall there be 3 days plague in your land? Makes a lot of sense to me if there are 3 options, the divine number that are being laid before him, that all 3 options would be options of 3. One is in years, one is in months, and one is in days. And I think probably by that 3, there's the testimony. Any way you go about it, this is a divine or 3 punishment that's being handed out to you. So, the 3 options, though, would be either 7 or 3, depending on the variation there. I think it's probably 3, my personal opinion. 3 years of famine, 3 months of having to run from your enemies. David has a little experience there. I'm going to guess he doesn't want to do that one anymore. Or shall there be 3 days of plague that I will bring on you, implied, in your land? So God, as the heavenly parent, says, I want you to consider and see what answer I should take back to him who sent me. I can't wait to do a lesson sometime on, I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but the idea is kind of abnormal parenting. And unfortunately, I think we've developed these ideas based on modern psychology, and most of which comes from people who have never had children, by the way. They have everything perfectly figured out as to how parenting should operate and how anti-biblical those concepts are. There are so many things that we've heard through the years. So from the greatest parent who ever lived, who invented all parents and all children and who wrote the manual on it, we have the possibility here given to one of the heavenly parent's children saying, here are 3 options. I'll let you choose your punishment. I think it's kind of a neat way to go about things parenting. Go ahead, Helen. I don't think so. It's just, yeah, no, that's okay. No, that's fine. So the drawing of the sword just really describes that these are army men, I think is what it is. These are military, yeah. So yeah, I don't think the fact that they draw the sword's an issue, but the fact of the counting of them and depending on them instead of, yeah. Right. Yeah. Right, yeah. No, yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. To answer it in short, probably both. As far as who's being tempted, we know, of course, we're told that David, from the parallel passage, David's being tempted by Satan in this. I think you can make the case also, Joab, he knows he's not supposed to be doing this. He's got a choice, I think, to make. Do I disobey my king, or do I disobey my King of Kings? So, I think it's a good question. I think it can go both ways, Helen. Thank you for that. Okay, so these are the three options, Heavenly Parent. Verse 14, David said to Gad, I am in great distress. These aren't good options. I don't want any of these. But he knows that it's right and it's fair. And by the way, I looked at the parallel passage. We don't really seem to know if there's any expanse of time here. You know, it may be that he just knows right away what he wants, or it may be that he takes the little while that's allotted to him. But he does decide this, please let us fall into the hand of the Lord, for his mercies are great, but do not let me fall into the hand of man. I think that's a wise decision, don't you? Of course, you have the power of the Almighty now, as opposed to the power of relative weaklings working against you. But he knows people on the outside, if we're put into their hands, they may have no mercy on us. He says, I would much rather put myself and my people into the hands of the one who could utterly destroy us, because I also know the mercy that's found. That's a beautiful thought, isn't it? Think about that as we stand before God in judgment. We're aware of the power that he holds, but is there really anyone else before whom you'd rather stand in judgment? Is there anyone who has more mercy than what God does? He wants the 3 days. Verse 15, so the Lord sent a plague upon Israel from the morning till the appointed time. So it would seem that the 3 days have unfolded here. From Dan to Beersheba, this is no light matter, 70,000 men of the people died. A couple of things. Number one, why do you think so many perish? That's a lot of people, 70,000. That's a big number, isn't it? Where's David's trust been? We're okay because we have these big numbers, and I think God's saying, all right, well, how about I take a huge number away from you then? Maybe you won't trust in it so much. The other thing is this, in terms of tens of thousands, what number? 70. 7 10,000s. Perhaps the perfect punishment, symbolizing from the perfect number of Scripture. Verse 16, and when the angel stretched out his hand over Jerusalem to destroy it, get rid of the holy city, guess what? The Lord relented from the destruction. He's not going to give his people what they deserve. What do you think? Wise choice made by the king? If the, let's say, Philistines approach the city of Jerusalem, and they have the chance, their swords are drawn to wipe it out, you think they're going to say, let's not. Let's just turn around and go home. Probably a pretty smart decision that David made. He sees the mercy of the Lord as he trusted on full display. The Lord relented from the destruction, and he said to the angel who was destroying the people, it is enough. Now restrain your hand. And the angel of the Lord was by the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. He's also called Ornan in 1 Chronicles 21, just a second name for him. Verse 17, then David spoke to the Lord when he saw the angel, so this is visible, who is striking the people, and said, surely I have sinned, and I have done wickedly, but these sheep, what have they done? Let your hand, I pray, be against me and against my father's house. And I believe that the angel of the Lord is going to accept that plea. Verse 18, and Gad the prophet came that day to David and said to him, go up and erect an altar to the Lord on the threshing floor of Araunah the Jebusite. So David, according to the word of Gad, went up as the Lord commanded. Now Araunah looked and saw the king and his servants coming toward him. So Araunah, the owner of this territory, goes out and bows before the king with his face to the ground. Then Araunah said, why has my lord the king come to his servant? And David said, to buy the threshing floor from you, to build an altar to the Lord, that the plague may be withdrawn from the people. By the way, any ideas as to why this certain place is so significant? It has to be this geographical spot. Latitude, such and such, 0.65. Longitude, such and such, 0.7. Why does it have to be this spot? Why in the world would that matter?
Because that's where the Lord showed mercy.
Okay. I believe so. You're on to something right there, Marcy. I'm going to show up here on the screen. Of course, this is extremely blown up. But this is Zion in the kind of bottom left portion of the screen, or Jerusalem, and we read Jebus, that's the old name of Jerusalem. And if you look up in this area where the threshing floor of Araunah is found, that's going to be the building spot of God's special dwelling, the house. That will be where Solomon, this man, David's son, is going to erect this facility, and where the altar later is going to be found. I think that's probably why this is such a significant location. Verse 21, Araunah said, "Why has my Lord," we read that earlier, so verse 22, Araunah said to David, "If you've come to buy this, no, let my Lord the king take and offer up whatever seems good to him. Look, I already have oxen for a burnt sacrifice. They're threshing implements, the yokes of oxen we could use for the wood, cut them up. All these, O king, Araunah has given freely to the king." And Araunah said to the king, "May the Lord your God accept you. I'll give you what you need to offer then to him. And you don't have to pay anything for it." What a deal. Rings through the ages. Verse 24, the king said to Araunah, "No, but I will surely buy it from you for a price. Nor will I offer burnt offerings to the Lord my God with that which cost me nothing." So David bought the threshing floor and the oxen for 50 shekels of silver. If you compare that to the cross-reference in 1 Chronicles 21, verse 25, we're told that he pays 600 shekels of gold. That's not the same thing. Here we go, another Bible contradiction. You look at the parallel passage, and he pays 600 shekels of gold for the site, which is for the area, I think probably for the land, is what's being spoken of. Here it's specifically mentioned in what's given, it's simply for the threshing floor and also for the oxen, or for some of the property and the equipment that's sitting on the land. And by the way, I looked that up. 600 shekels of gold, and did a little calculating. That equates to 15 pounds of gold. It's not that David just gives something. I think he at least pays full, if not even more than full price, because he wants it to cost him the maximum amount in his offering to God. Verse 25, we'll close there. "And David built there an altar to the Lord and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. So the Lord heeded the prayers for the land, and the plague was withdrawn from Israel." There's so much more that could be said about this, and some things I'd like to draw from it New Testament application-wise. But I'll simply say this, a powerful principle we take out is in the offering that we give to God, it's not about the sheer amount that's passed over to the Lord. What key word needs to be involved in our offering whenever we do it? If that's in the monetary offering on the Lord's Day, if that's in our service to God and the effort that we give through the week, what's it to be? What's the key word? It needs to come from the heart. You need to want to do such a thing, and it revolves around sacrifice that we make to God. And based on sacrifice, I think of the poor widow and her 2 mites. God's so impressed, not because of the amount, it's just the sacrifice that she makes in the offering. It's about the heart that's behind it. And we're going to see that it starts with this sacrifice that David makes. It enables the construction of God's magnificent house. And today it's the sacrifice we're willing to make in our offering to the Lord that can make a beautiful house go up. And we're talking about souls being added to the Lord's body. All right, that's through chapter 24. Any other thoughts to be brought out? And I know we're kind of bouncing quite a bit, but there's some pretty important things over in the other section too. And man, are there responsibilities on our shoulders when we have the opportunity to, when we know the truth, and to live it out and to share it, and then we don't. Look at the harm that it could potentially bring. It's not just about for ourselves. It's about others also. Go ahead, Roy. You started to. Yeah. Really? Oh, that's the bonkers one that always. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's interesting. So I want to know, tell me afterward about the plural brown recluse, because I've joked about brown recluse, but don't tell me it's brown reclui. There's no way. I give up. So, yeah, Rebecca. Definitely. Yeah, very good. Yeah, how often do we want to try to avoid anything that's inconvenient for us when that's what it's all about? Yeah, very good. Okay, so next time, 1 Chronicles 22. 1 Chronicles 22 is the reading, the last verse, memory work, 19. Thanks.